Hey folks, this is Jesse Cope back with another episode of the American Soul Podcast. Hope y'all are doing well wherever y'all are and whatever part of the day you're in, whether you're getting ready for work or driving to or from work or cooking dinner, dishes, laundry, changing diapers, whatever it is that you're doing, conference period, lunch. I sure do appreciate you joining me. Give me a little bit of your time. For those of y'all that continue to share the podcast with others, I'm very grateful for y'all. And for those of y'all that have joined over on Patreon and are financially supporting the podcast by joining one of the 3 different tiers over there, I'm incredibly grateful for y'all and humbled by that. And I will try to use your time wisely. Lord, as always, thank you for the time to record this podcast, the people who listen to it and share it, be with them and their families, guide them throughout their days. Me as well, give me the words that you want me to speak. No more and no less. In your son's name, we pray. Fall has finally hit. We have a dirt road full of leaves, which I'm sure you can hear in the background. And the trees are brilliant gold and red and orange. And it's supposed to get warm again this week, which is not enjoyable, but that's okay. Winter will come soon enough. But for today, really is gorgeous. I came down with something a few days ago, actually just a couple days ago, and it's been sticking around, so forgive me if you hear me sniffling in the background. We talked about this last week, a couple days, and so we're going to run through it today. I say not infrequently on the podcast that I think we're headed for a fight. The other option, of course, being 1920s or teens and 20s Russia, 1920s and 30s Germany, or 1950s and 60s China, which would be far more devastating and horrific and cruel and evil than a fight like a civil war or revolutionary war, assuming that the good guys came out on top. But barring a miracle from God, which is always a possibility, right? State motto of Ohio, all things are possible with God. We look like we're headed that direction. And so the question often is, well, why? You know, what if we just elect the right person? What if we just change our fiscal policy just a little bit, or, tweak our domestic policies? Just, what if we change this or that, and you can go a lot of different arguments or routes. What about states' rights? If we just give the states back all the power that they originally had in the Constitution. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, folks, just to throw that out there, but that's not the real root cause. Again, what we're trying to do today and what we've been trying to do, you see this in spades in military and education, a lot of different places, but we are trying to treat the symptoms and not the disease. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the disease. And so we're going to go through about 6 or 7 different core issues. And this is why coexistence and reconciliation aren't possible anymore, folks. Because we used to be able to be on different political sides, but we had these core values. And it's the quote that we go back to so often from Coolidge about, if these core Christian teachings of Christ ever cease to be pretty much universal, across the country, then our government, our institutions would fail. And that's what's happening today, and this is why. And so when you hear other people talk, whatever side they're on, because there's people on both sides of the political spectrum that want to ignore the real issue. And you've got some that don't. You've got some that want to acknowledge it. But as President Wilson said, we were born a Christian nation. As so many others, what we talk about normally on this podcast is that tie to Jesus Christ and God. As Washington said, it's impossible to rightly govern the world without God in the Bible. And so if we're a Christian nation, what are these core principles that we need to follow and that we're not today? So the first one is God himself. And Jesus Christ makes this abundantly clear when he gives us the two greatest commandments. So he's asked, "Teacher, what's the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus responded, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commands." One of the puppy dogs decided to come out for a walk, our three-legged wolf. So this is really the first issue, the key issue. And we've talked about this often on the podcast. Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story talked about this in his commentaries on the Constitution, particularly the First Amendment, saying that if the founding generation had thought that the state was in any way going to lessen or lower the importance of Christianity, they never would have agreed to the Constitution in the first place. And so we have a responsibility, as our first Supreme Court Chief Justice John Jay talked about, to choose and elect Christians for our rulers in this Christian nation. And so when we try and kick God out of our institutions, which we've done a pretty good job of since 1947, and the decision there, which I have said I was going to start to read, and I can't find it, but at any rate, the 1947 decision, we've done a pretty good job of kicking God out. Well, you can't have America without God, without the principles of Christ at the core of our nation. So that's the first and the biggest thing, and everything else springs from that. The second core issue that we've really got here is life. Because of the Christian notion, the principles in our country, particularly you talk about our Declaration, the very first unalienable right is life, the ability for citizens to have life. And before some of y'all do, because I get these comments, and you say, well, what about barbarism toward the Native Americans? Well, the Native Americans weren't really so kind themselves to each other or to colonists. And so that works both ways. And then, well, what about slavery, right? Right. And so the problem here, though, is you're actually making the argument for me when you say that, because the problem is in those times we didn't follow the principles of Christ, and that's when the nation went off track. So again, the point is when we get away from God and Jesus Christ, we're not following their principles. And so that's when we get into trouble. And so this life, this right to life, this unalienable God-given right, well, where does that come from? Well, it comes from the principles of Jesus Christ. And so you talk about, Jeremiah 1, verse 5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. Psalm 139, for you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. So, in both of these cases, we have a strong heritage of life from the Bible, from God. And so when we choose instead to murder 63 million plus of our own citizens, right? Then we got problems, and we do today. We've far surpassed Hitler, and we've gotten pretty close to Mao and Stalin as far as murdering our own citizens. And you can't have that. And you can't have people that claim to stand for life and those that claim to stand against life coexist or reconcile. One side or the other is going to have to fold. They're going to give up, right? So on all of these issues, that's the point, folks, is you can't, it's like having a marriage where I've used this analogy recently. It seems to fit. You have one spouse that says, well, we can sleep with whoever we want. You have another spouse that says, no, it's just the same. Well, that marriage can't survive. One spouse or the other is going to have to concede the point. One spouse is going to have to say, well, yeah, you're right. Actually, we can't sleep around with whoever we want. Or the other spouse is going to have to say, well, no, you're right. We can do whatever we want. Or they're going to have to decide to split. Those are your options. And this isn't exactly on point here, but just while we're talking about it, the idea of secession is the failed ideology of the South. The idea of the Union is the successful, great ideology of the North and the patriots in the Revolutionary War. So when you have one side that's doing evil, which is what the left is promoting constantly in this nation, based on these ideologies that we're walking through, they no longer have a right to the country or to the land. And it's time for them. They either change their hearts, their ways, repent of the sins that they've been committing and actually change. Doesn't mean they're going to be perfect, just like nobody's perfect except for Jesus Christ, but really attempt to change and work at change, or you leave and you find somewhere else to go. And that's what ended up happening in both the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. The next two kind of go together, feminism and, or I should say on the positive side, roles for men and women and pro-marriage, marriage between a man and a woman. And in both these cases, right, Genesis 1, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And then on marriage, but Jesus said to them, because of your hardness of heart, he wrote you this commandment, talking about divorce. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. And so what we've done today is we've tried to say, well, men and women are the same. Not equal, folks. That's totally different. Equal and the same aren't the same. The same means that men and women are the same, and they're not. We're not the same biologically. We're not the same psychologically. And if you have lived on this earth for any length of time, you know that. Kids in school know it. Adults know it. If you're married, you certainly know it. We're different. And those different strengths and weaknesses, right, we complement each other. We make us better as a whole. That's why the Bible talks about a cord of three strands, the male, the husband, the wife, and God. It's not easily broken. And so this idea that has been brought in, because we rejected God again, that marriage can be whatever. Men can sleep with men, women can sleep with women, etc., etc. And he lays this out in Romans 1. You can go through and read it. I won't take all the time today because we're kind of getting toward the end. But men and women aren't the same, and marriage is only between a man and a woman. And the LGBTQ movement is sexual deviancy. It's immoral. It's sin. It destroys families. It destroys marriages, and it destroys the lives of men and women. And it all comes back toward feminism, where we started pretending, just like they do in the military, just like we started to do by lowering standards, saying, oh, well, we'll put men and women together. And you see this just across, it's sad that what's being done to women's sports is what's finally waking us up, right? But you can't have those two sides. You can't have part of the country say, well, there's specific roles for men and women in marriage and in life. And And the other side say, no, 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 we have to be exactly the same. And you can't have one side say, well, marriage is only between a man and a woman, as our Supreme Court historically defined it. And the other side say, no, marriage is whatever we say it is. Well, again, one side or the other is going to have to fold, folks. You can't have both, okay? See how much time. Yeah, we're getting there, getting close. So the next one is, and this kind of applies in two different cases. You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor defer to the great, but you are to judge your neighbor fairly. That's from Leviticus 19. Differing weights and differing measures, both of them are abominable to the Lord. Proverbs 20. The same law will apply to a person who is native born and to the foreigner who lives among you. Exodus 12 and Leviticus 24, you shall have one kind of law for the foreigner as well as the native born, for I am the Lord your God. So these next two core issues really are the bigotry that we've seen spring up in education, the identity politics, this revisionist history where we kick out all men are created equal and the truth of our American heritage, and we replace it with this idea that it's based upon your race or your gender or your ethnicity, right? And this also applies to illegal immigration. We say, well, you can take the bank robber analogy. Somebody, an American citizen, goes and robs a bank that has kids. Well, when they're caught, it doesn't matter whether it's 1 year later or 40 years later, there's a price to pay. There's consequences. And just because they have kids or just because they've lived, this lie for decades, that doesn't matter. There's still consequences. So we treat American citizens one way, but then we have illegals that are criminals that come in and bring other criminals with them and terrorists with them. And we have a completely different standard for them, saying, well, we're just going to wipe away all of that and you just come on in and we'll be okay. And that's not what the Bible teaches at all. So especially for those of you all out there that are Christian and listening to this, and you've heard other Christians say, well, God tells us to care about the foreigner. Absolutely, he does, 100%. God tells us to care about the poor and the widow and the orphan. Absolutely, 100%. None of that is accomplished by critical race theory and bigotry and feminism in education or illegal immigration. None of that is kind and caring. All of these core issues, when you take God's side, they help the poor and the needy. As Lincoln said, the right side. I'm always worried about being on God's side because I know that God's on the right side. So when we follow the commands of God, we help the least of these. But every time we go against that, which all of these others are, in this case, these last couple we're talking about illegal immigration and critical race theory and bigotry in education and all your 504 accommodations where you have different tests for different kids and some get this kind of help and this kind of help and the others don't, extra time or calculators or questions read to them or modified questions, etc., etc. These are all double standards. This is hypocrisy. And he's pretty clear on that too. He says that differing weights and measures are abominable to the Lord. That's pretty bad, folks. That's about as bad as it gets. God doesn't have any use for impartial or partiality, and being kind to the poor just because they're poor, or being cruel to the rich just because they're rich, right? And so that kind of gets into the last one, which is socialism, communism. And there's a great little parable about the vineyard owner that Jesus tells, and he hires all these people for a different number of hours, and at the end of the day, he ends up paying them all the same amount, which is what he agreed to. So the ones that have worked 10 hours, they get paid what they agreed, a day's wage. But the ones that worked 1 hour, they also get paid a day's wage. And the first ones are really irritated, which you kind of get, right? If you worked all day and you bore the heat and everything, and you get paid the same amount as the guys that were only out here an hour, that can be kind of frustrating. But Jesus is saying, look, I paid you exactly what I agreed to pay you. And take it and go. I wish to give the last man the same as you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what's my own? So that wipes out socialism right there because the rich have the ability to do what they want with what's theirs. Is it not lawful for me to do that, right? Or is it because your eye is envious because I'm generous? And so, and then the great little ending there, so the last shall be first and the first last. But this idea of socialism, communism, there's nothing, there's nothing kind about it. You're not being kind by taking from others to quote unquote give to somebody. And there's no support for that in the Bible because it's not kind and caring. And whatever you want to say, you don't know the heart of a person. But a lot of times the socialism, communism stuff, at least in action, it's what Jesus laid out there. It's greed. Are you upset that you're not getting, you feel slighted, or you feel like, are you just really upset because you're greedy and you want more? And so at any rate, socialism and communism, they go completely against our American heritage. They go against the teachings in the Bible, and there's no basis for it. So these core issues, folks, and then I'll wrap up real quick. We have the side that follows our founding faith and principles, and we have the side that goes against them. Those two can't reconcile. They can't coexist. One side or the other is going to have to give way. And so, a lot of other issues we can sit down at the table and we can discuss. We can have really strong opinions and differing opinions, and we can still sit there and talk about it. We need to sit there and talk about it. It's like a marriage. When you have conflict, you've got to sit there and work it out. But there's a difference between having conflict on things where you want to approach a problem in a different manner, or you have a different opinion about how things should be done, and these core moral issues. And that's a completely different ballgame. And you can't sit there and reconcile in that marriage when you have vastly moral different framework. All right, folks, I'll leave you alone. Thanks for coming on a little walk. Again, for those of y'all that continue to share the podcast, I'm grateful for those of y'all that have joined over on Patreon and are financially supporting the podcast. I'm incredibly grateful for that. God bless y'all. God bless your families. God bless America. We'll talk to y'all again real soon. Looking forward to it.